That didn't work. Welcome to Throwback Thursday, everyone. Mark Fisher style.
Well, I got kind of a story that's not only a throwback story, but it also answers a viewer question. We had a question a while back about how do you get sponsors if you want to be a professional fisherman or if you want to get sponsored while you're fishing local and regional events. And a long time ago, I got some really good advice about this, and I did something about it following this advice. So I'm going to pass that along today on Throwback Thursday on Mark Fisher Outdoors. We'll be right back. We're back. Welcome to MFO, everybody. I'm Mark Fisher.
And I'm Megan Fuller.
So I was telling you I got a story about way back when I first started out, and I got some advice. I'm going to be dropping a few names in this episode here. So I'm going back right away. Some of the first advice that I got a long time ago from a good friend up in Wisconsin. He owns Gallus Marine, Mike Gallus. And I went into him and I said, hey, Mike, how about sponsoring me? I'm fishing local events. And Mike kind of looked at me the way Mike does. And he said, Mark, fishermen are a dime a dozen. What do you got that makes you different? And quite honestly, I didn't have much of an answer for him. But as I was driving home that day, I was kind of thinking, yeah, fishermen are a dime a dozen. There's an awful lot of guys out there that are doing just what I'm doing. They're fishing and they want to get somebody to help them defray the costs. So I kind of kept in mind what Mike said to me. And at the time, I was fishing regional events, local events here on the Fox chain. And I was fishing Northland bass and big bucks bass. And one of the things that I noticed at that time, we would get tournament results through a newspaper. And again, remember, this is back when dinosaurs were roaming around and things like that. But we would get our tournament results via a newspaper called the Tournament Angler News.
Okay.
And the tournament, you'd open up the Tournament Angler News and there would be the Northland Bass tournament results from 2 weeks ago. And you'd find out who won and what they were doing and how much money they made. And
so I wouldn't
like
be able to be like keeping track of the
oh yeah,
the
you'd
leaderboard.
Absolutely, keeping track. But again, remember, this was before the internet or anything like that, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things that I noticed right off the bat is these articles that were being written were really very, very poorly written.
Okay.
And given the fact that I had gone to college and kind of knew how to write and things like that, I kind of got in touch with Denny Martin and Mary Jean Martin and kind of asked if they wouldn't mind if I wrote the articles for them. Well, there were two components to that kind of worked out. Number one, I was okay at writing. I was pretty decent. And they clearly didn't like writing those articles. It was kind of with and rightfully so. They had a lot to do. They were running the organization. They were keeping track of everything, doing the tournaments, paying the checks. They had a ton to do. And so when I kind of volunteered to do this, that was a big plus for them. And so they agreed to, sure, Mark, if you write the articles, we'll kind of help you out by giving you entry fees into the tournament. So that was a big plus for me. I was fishing these tournaments and didn't have to worry about entry fees for it.
Nice.
The other pluses that started to come around as I started to do this was that as I wrote the articles, I would be able to feature, let's say you were fishing and you told me that you were fishing in a certain type of boat and you were throwing a certain type of a bait. Well, if that boat happened to be a Phoenix boat that was one of my sponsors, I would say, you were fishing out of a Phoenix boat. But if you were fishing out of a boat that was a different type of a boat, I would say you ran your boat too, but I could write the sentence, you ran your Phoenix boat if it worked for my sponsor. And you happen to be running a Mercury motor, that Mercury motor cruised you across the lake to get there. But if it was a different kind of motor, I would just say, I wouldn't even mention it. If you were throwing a particular bait that was one of my sponsors, I would mention it. If you were just throwing another type of bait, I would say, oh, you were throwing a jig, okay? And it would not be named.
So you definitely got to use a lot of this for your benefit.
I wrote the articles in a way that promoted my sponsors. Now, granted, if you had a sponsor and you mentioned that you were throwing a certain type of a jig because that was your sponsor, I would mention it, okay? But if there was anything that was left to my creative writing, I would write it in a way that would push my sponsors, but not necessarily, talk about people who were not my sponsors. And with that came the answer to Mike's question. Fishermen are a dime a dozen, but what do I have that other fishermen don't? And at that time, writing those articles gave me the ability to promote certain sponsors more so than other anglers. And that was the answer to Mike's question. I was able to then take that one step further, and instead of writing articles that went into Tournament Angler News, we started our own newsletter called the Pro Fish News. And I hooked up Northland Bass and Big Bucks Bass. Tommy Berthold at the time was running Big Bucks Bass, and said, guys, why don't I just do it for your two organizations? Instead of having Tournament Angler News, which is giving articles about local events all over Illinois, we'll just do it for these two circuits, call it the Pro Fish News, and we'll send it out to the members of both of these circuits.
Okay.
They liked that idea. We consolidated it. Now, instead of just writing articles, I was in charge of the entire newsletter, which meant I now get to do ad space within the newsletter, which gives my sponsors even more exposure. Okay. Then what we would do is we would go to fishing shows like the Madison Fishing Expo and the Green Bay Fishing Show and things like that. And we would sign up members to be part of the Pro Fish Club, and they would get the Pro Fish newsletter. And so now, instead of having just the members of Northland Bass and just the members of Big Bucks Bass, we had thousands of members who were signed up for the Pro Fish News and that were getting these newsletters sent once a month, that were getting all of this promotion. Now, again, remember, this was all before the internet. So thousands of people getting it back then was a lot. Nowadays, 1,000 people isn't anything, and newsletters aren't even now we're doing YouTube channels. Okay, but I guess that's kind of my point to Throwback Thursday here, is that I agree with the advice that Mike Gallus gave me a long time ago. Fishermen are a dime a dozen. What do you have that gives you the ability to promote sponsors, which makes it worth their while to help you in your game? And you got to come up with that, whatever it is, whether it's that, you have the ability to write, you have the ability to do a YouTube channel, you have whatever that is. And those things change over time. It used to be that we would go to a lot of fishing shows and do a lot of expos and things like that, do seminars and all of those things. Those things have, especially with COVID, those things have kind of gone by the wayside. But, nowadays the big thing is what we're doing right now.
Okay.
So we pass that along, and hope you liked our Throwback Thursday. Guys, I do want to remind you, we had 3 winners last week.
Yep.
Let me see if I can remember them. Mark Coleman. Who was another one? Jim Lopez, right? Yep. Mark Coleman, Jim Lopez, and Mike Wilkie. You three guys, if we haven't heard from you yet, DM me, get a hold of me on Instagram, Facebook, get us your address and stuff like that so that we can get those prize packages. Thank you so much for subscribing, guys. Thanks everybody who has been subscribing and liking and sharing. We really appreciate all of that. Thank you so much for doing that. If you haven't subscribed, you should hit that button right now, though, right?
Mhm. Absolutely.
All right.
We need to increase our numbers for those sponsors.
See, it all fits together, guys. Absolutely. Guys, have a nice evening. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.
Good night.